Sort of?
No, funziona, ho provato
Funziona.
prima, l'ho provato.
Ok, sono io pessima con
No,
questa
ora cerco
voce
un po' di
da...
noise. Sa.
Ah, ok, fa. Perfetto. It's not gonna stream right in my face, is it? It's like...
No. Start in a couple seconds.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it's fine if it is...
Rebecca will do a great job.
Okay, it's fine if it is my face, but I put makeup on. Thanks. Aspettiamo Donatella. Donatella era fuori. Non so se si sta cambiando. Non so, vuoi che la vada a cercare? Le scrivo un messaggio?
No, Peter, mia collega è andata. Io l'ho sentita, però...
Ok. No, siamo entrati insieme, però lei aveva la bambina e mi ha detto anche che si voleva cambiare. Però, insomma, penso che tanto ancora sta arrivando gente.
Sempre un 10-15 minuti. Finiamo sempre.
Senti, tu mi hai detto che stavi in UK prima. Dove? Ah, carino. Carino. Adesso in che zona stai qua a Roma? Ah. Come? Sì, infatti mi sembrava lei. Io ho bisogno degli occhiali ma non li metto, quindi non vedevo bene. Mi alzo così, sì, mi alzo che fai l'annuncio.
Adesso comunque c'è un sacco di gente.
Sì, buono.
Cioè,
Sì, sì. Aspetta che questo te la tolgo di mezzo. Ti volevo dire, mi hanno scritto i miei genitori che non hanno ricevuto il codice del live stream. Sai chi li manda?
Ah sì, lui c'ha, no vabbè, il link, glielo puoi mandare, dice che non ha
I miei genitori.
Dammi un'email, qualcosa.
Guarda, se vuoi, se gliela scrivi, se lo scrivi qui, gliela posso
se
mandare.
no glielo giri tu, non usi WhatsApp, Signal. Giraglielo su
Qualsiasi cosa.
A dove che devo mandare?
Lui c'ha il telefono pure mezzo.
Lo vuoi scrivere?
Sì.
Come si fa? youtube.com /watch punto interrogativo V minuscola uguale 8 A maiuscola 0 R minuscola 6 S maiuscola I minuscola 2 Z minuscola
Aspetta, 2, Z minuscola.
O maiuscola O maiuscola E maiuscola.
E maiuscola? Ok, quindi
Compare, vedi?
allora youtube.com/watch punto interrogativo D uguale 8 A maiuscola 0 R minuscola 6 S I
Maiuscola, S
sì,
minuscola,
I minuscola 2 Z minuscola O maiuscola E maiuscola. Ok.
Vedi se compare?
Lo potevi girare, lo facevi prima girarlo su Signal.
E non ce l'ho però il suo numero.
Non ti preoccupare, dai, Va bene, se non funziona non
No,
importa,
se no,
comunque
scusa,
posso
giralo
iniziare.
su Signal e lo giro a lei, così facciamo prima. Che tu me l'hai girato ma sul link non ce l'ho. Questi cacchio di piattaforme.
Facessi questa interoperabilità, guarda, sarebbe molto
Se qua, figurati.
Se non sbaglio Alberto mi ha detto che questo è il microfono che funziona meglio.
Al momento sì, no, sì, quello principale. Poi invece apri quello che se devi parlare da là, non sono tutti spenti. Tranne questo qua sono tutti spenti.
Ah, li dobbiamo accendere? Ok, questo è il link.
Grazie, comunque gliel'ho inviato.
Pure tanto stai pure su Signal, no?
Sì, sì.
Così non cambio piattaforma.
Eccoci qua.
Dovrebbe
Grazie.
essere arrivato.
Sì. Ah, ecco, era V, non D.
Sì, facciamo prima che manualmente.
Ok. Grazie.
Ma prima glielo mandi e poi inizio.
Sì, sì, gliel'ho mandato.
Che voglio che ci segua.
Se ce la fanno bene, se no si attaccano.
No, dai.
Grazie.
E che ti volevo dire, quindi dopo c'è la slide, la possiamo far vedere?
Sì,
quando
sì,
io-
glielo dico subito, glielo dico a voce ed è nella slide dopo di questa.
Ok, come si chiama la cosa? Dove...
Not Gonna Lie si chiama.
Ah, Not Gonna Lie?
Sì.
Veramente, il pad?
Sì, 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 vedi, guarda, c'è scritto qua.
Ah, ok.
È un'app.
NGL?
Sì, sì, è Not Gonna Lie, sì.
È un... non l'ho mai sentito. Ok. Hello everyone. Hey. Hi. Shall we get started? Yeah, it's already 10 minutes past 6 p.m., so I guess we should get started. Welcome everyone to this amazing new session of Digital Delights and Disturbances. Amazing because there is an amazing amount of bodies here, which is amazing. Because as you know, we have been living for the past 2 years without, in the so-called social distancing era. fully masked, nobody's around, And so this is exciting to see so many people now in presence, but also online. I hope someone is watching the live streaming because, now is hybrid is the new black. So we should get back in presence as we are here in Aula Magna at John Cabot University, but also welcome the online crowd who is following us through the YouTube live streaming. Thank you, Roberto, Brian, and the folks at the Media Lab for making this happen. So I'm extremely delighted to introduce this new edition of Digital Delights and Disturbances, which is the lecture series on critical tech run by the Com department at the John Cabot University. I am Donatella Della Ratta and I am officially on leave. But today I'll be back in spring, hopefully. But today I really wanted to be here to welcome, to kickstart this new edition of the lecture series, because the past 2 years we have been running this through online or hybrid mode, just open for the GCU community, fully masked. So this is really, again, exciting to be here in a full presence. And also I am happy that we are starting this new edition of Digital Delights and Disturbances with an Italian guest, Carolina Are, also known on Twitter, Instagram, and many other platforms as Blogger on Pole. It's a pleasure, yes, thank you, Carolina, for being with us in presence. It's a pleasure to kickstart this edition with a person like Carolina, not because she is Sardinian, and I have to say I am biased because I am Sardinian too, but because Carolina represents what we should aim at as academics. She's an academic, but she's not boring, She's colorfully dressed in red, wearing my favorite color, by the way, red sunglasses, bright, cheerful, so exactly the opposite, unfortunately, of what you guys, students, mostly have in mind when they think about academics, boring, very gray. I am very dark also in my... So it's great to have this explosion of color. I fully respect Carolina. She's a bright young scholar, and she studies content moderation, not only from the perspective of an academic, but from the perspective of a practitioner, which is extremely important. Too often, we academics, we write papers or books without touching the field, and this is absolutely wrong, and also harmful to the knowledge that we produce for the student. And as citizens also, so never do that. Never do this kind of theory, which is completely detached from practice. So Carolina wrote a PhD on content moderation from the perspective of a young scholar and also from the perspective of somebody who practices the platform. Because as you know, and you will hear from her, she's blogger on pole, she does pole dancing, also fun stuff, I have to say. And she has an experience of using the platform, so she knows what she's talking about. It's not just theoretical knowledge coming from heaven, but it's something that she practices on an everyday life basis. And now, after discussing her PhD, she is now Innovation Fellow at Northumbria University in the UK, so out of Europe. So we flew her through the channel to come back to her home country, and where she does really an amazing research. You will hear from her. So I spoke too much, but because I am excited to be back here, also to have a full house of people. So without further hesitation, we'll open the floor up. That's very important also for the live streaming. Carolina has a very interesting app. A link that she will show you is on the slide, to submit anonymous question. The talk is related to shadow banning, a lot of exposing nudity also on platforms, so topics that are also quite sensitive. You are welcome to ask questions here in person by raising your hands after the talk, but also writing and sending anonymous questions through the app. And also people who are following the live streaming, they can do the same, and the questions will be completely anonymous. Okay, so without further hesitation, you want to come here or you want to stay there?
I think
Would
I'll
it-
stay here because I can use the,
Yeah.
the arrows to change the slides. if
Okay.
that's okay.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the intro, Donatella. It's such a pleasure to be here and such an honor to be introduced in such an amazing way. Before I start, I would like to add a little disclaimer. I don't normally talk like this, but my voice is gone because I was a little too enthusiastic in teaching my last pole dance classes on Tuesday, and I just screamed a few yes girl too many, and now this is the result. So please bear with me. I hope my voice will stick until the end of the talk. If I sound a little robotic, maybe it's a bit fitting with the aim and the topics of today. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a huge pleasure to meet you all and to be here. You can find me all over the internet, as Donna mentioned, at Blogger on Pole. This trigger warning does mean that you will see my ass. If that is a problem for you, maybe don't look. But if you want a live tweet or live story what I'm saying, you're very welcome to. Today, I'll be telling you about my disempowering but interesting research-wise experiences of deplatforming and of being a content moderation researcher while also being a censored user. As Donna mentioned, I'm an innovation fellow at the Center for Digital Citizens, which is at Northumbria University in Newcastle. But I have a few different lives that I've managed to string together and that are informing today's talk. So I started my journey researching on online abuse and conspiracy theories, particularly on a really abusive community of trolls who were harassing the families of someone who was a victim of crime. And then because of that, I realized very inconveniently during the second year of my PhD that I couldn't really publish out of it, because if I did publish out of it, then I would also be harassed by these people. Very conveniently or inconveniently, during the second year of my PhD, Instagram started shadow banning pole dancers, meaning that the initially hobby and then the job that I did became incredibly affected by it. So I came out as a pole dancing academic because of this, and I started publishing a variety of research pieces, particularly on the censorship of nudity. So today I'll be telling you all about that, about shadow banning, about account removal, about deplatforming, and about how I put my personal experience into this type of research and about what I found. And I'll be telling you about the research project that I'm currently doing at the CDC, which is showing some disturbing results about how mainstream social media platforms govern all of our content and how basically we're just left down in the lurch when something happens to our account. But as Donna was mentioning, I appreciate that I will be saying some controversial things today, or that maybe some of you have experiences that you do not want to share publicly with the rest of the class, or maybe you're at home and you're not able to raise your hand. So all you have to do, if you do want to ask a question, ideally a question, please don't be that person that makes a comment and not asks a question, but you can type ngl.link/blogger on pole in your browser, and you can keep them coming. If you can open it right now and you can keep putting your questions up in there. I'll be checking them at the end of the talk. So without further ado, let's get started. So as I mentioned, Instagram started shadow banning pole dancers during the second year of my PhD. What happened was I was growing with my account. I was keeping it quite separate from my academic stuff because I didn't know how academics would react to me having my ass out on the internet. But what started happening was that I noticed my reach progressively declining. And that was strange because initially, particularly when I was a beginner, when I hadn't received any professional pole dance training, when I was pretty bad at what I was doing, I was still getting quite a lot of views. And then all of a sudden, as soon as a law that I will mention in a sec got approved in the US, suddenly, or even just a few months after, suddenly my reach started declining. So while I could see in my insights, because I have like a creator account on Instagram, while I could see in my insights that a few months before, with an account of like 3 1,000 followers, so not, a massive account. I was reaching over 10,000 people. Then when my following doubled just a few months after, and when I started receiving professional teacher training, so you could argue I'd become a better dancer, my reach started going down, and it made no sense. It made no sense because of my following that was growing. It made no sense because my skills were improving. I was very confused as to what was happening. And basically, a lot of what I do, a lot of what we know as researchers in the realms of content moderation and as activists in the realm of content moderation, we owe to sex workers, because sex workers have been targeted by this censorship first. And the sex workers in my network, the same sex workers who gave us pole dancing as a hobby and as a sport, because pole dancing comes from stripping, not from other stuff that people come up with to pretend that it hasn't got its roots in the sex industry. Well, strippers and sex workers were the first to feel the effects of this legislation that was anti-nudity and anti-sex online, and they were the first at raising awareness of it. So what happened was, when I noticed the sex workers in my account talking about it, I started looking into it more. And what I found out was that, as someone who was researching on content moderation and was seeing horrible online abuse not being removed, I had the academic expertise to talk about this. I also used to work in PR and social media marketing, so I had the professional expertise of working through a platform. And I was very inconveniently also a censored user. So what I did at the time was write a really scathing blog post about shadow banning on my blog. And because of my previous PR and journalism training, my first thought was, well, I'm going to be slagging off Instagram in this blog post. I need to give them the right to reply. So I sent an email to their press team thinking like, lol, they're never going to reply. They're going to ignore me. And little did I know that about 2 hours later, they did reply, and they wanted to answer my questions. Now, they did answer my questions, but they answered my questions in their very usual blend of PR spiel that didn't really give any answers. But a conversation started then. And they kept denying that shadow banning was a thing. This was 2019. They kept denying that they were targeting specific communities. And then the summer of 2019 came, and suddenly all of pole dancing hashtags were shadow banned. So for those of you who don't know what shadow banning is, you're very lucky. I wish I was you, but suddenly I do know what it is. It's basically when your views decline and when platforms hide content from their main Explore or For You page without notifying the user about it. So you don't know whether content is not doing well because you're boring, because it's not what your audience wants to see, or because actually platforms are doing something about it. And users are not notified about it, but what you can see sometimes is if a hashtag has been shadow banned and then you look at the hashtag, Instagram will tell you that the majority of those posts have been hidden because they go against community guidelines. Well, that happened to the majority of pole dancing hashtags in the summer of 2019. So I continued asking Instagram about it, I continued writing about it, and a few very famous, way bigger than me pole dancers noticed this. And because they'd started a petition against this, they asked me to join their team to ask all of our respective following to ask Instagram for more clarity. So I sent them off I sent them the petition that they'd created asking for more clarity, and I asked them the questions that we'd ask all of our followers. And strangely, Instagram apologized. So Instagram apologized to pole dancers through my blog in 2019 for hiding our hashtags in error. They never used the shadow ban word, but they admitted that something was going on. So that kickstarted something. A variety of people, all of our followers, realized that shadow banning was a thing, that it was happening to people near you and to people like you. It was happening not to just pole dancers, but to sex educators, to models, to photographers, to small brands, to creatives of all sorts. So that gave birth to a bigger campaign, which is called Everybody Visible. You can see the logos up there. Basically, all these people, all these communities that I've mentioned, we got together asking Instagram for more clarity, more transparency, more communications. And what we did was post together either pictures of us half naked or our logo and tagging the Instagram and Facebook chiefs on it. And that was pretty hilarious on the day because, so this is Sheryl Sandberg's tagged section, and it was all ass and titties for about a week. Then it was fun, and it made noise, and it showed how censorship of nudity was a real thing, even though platforms kept saying that it happened by mistake. So that really showed us the power of getting together and the power of talking about something that platforms do not want to talk about. So as a result of that, I began writing more and more about content moderation. I published the first study on the shadow banning of pole dancing that I've just noticed I've misspelled there, great, in the top corner. And I've been conceptualizing pole dancing as, I've been conceptualizing shadow banning and content moderation in general as an online translation of a criminological theory which is called risk society theory. Now, what does that mean? So, let's go back to that law that I mentioned. That law is called FOSTA-SESTA. If you study media and communication, you've probably heard of it. It's an American law. It's an exception to Section 230 of the US Telecommunications Act. What Section 230 did before FOSTA-SESTA was remove any liability from platforms about what was posted on them. So if you went and posted a threat on Facebook, Zuckerberg was not going to be responsible for it because Facebook was just an intermediary. That still stands apart from content that facilitates sex trafficking, which is what FOSTA-SESTA was meant to tackle. The thing is, that's not what happened, because platforms are a private company, so as a result, for fear of being seen to facilitate sex trafficking, they've been over-censoring pretty much everything. So they went from sex trafficking, which is a horrible crime, to sex work, which is a job, and a job that a lot of people do consensually. And then from sex work, they went to pole dancing, they went to burlesque, they went to erotic art, they went to pictures, they went to sex educations, they went to even like athletes, they went to women in leggings being far too sexual for the platform. So much that when our pole dancing hashtags were censored, hashtag female fitness was shadow banned on Instagram, and it was all pictures of women in leggings, but hashtag male fitness, full of shirtless, oily dudes with their nipples out, was not censored. So there's a clear bias in there about what's seen as too sexual, which is usually women and non-conforming people's bodies, and definitely not men. So now that I've explained what FOSTA-SESTA has done, here's where the risk society thing comes in. Offline, World Risk Society, which has been created by Beck and Giddens in the 90s, it's a theory that basically said that governments, to prevent risks, ended up restricting civil liberties. But because they can't anticipate all the risks, sometimes they anticipate the wrong risks, and people are caught in the net of this risk prevention. In doing so, they give huge power to private firms like insurance firms, and these firms decide which members of society are risky, which members of society are meant to be excluded, which members of society are meant to be othered. Why am I using risk society theory for content moderation? Well, because safety is at the center of community guidelines on platforms. They say that, you know, this content has been removed because we want our community to be safe, because we want our space to be safe for children, we want our space to be safe for everyone. And plus, platforms are a private company. They are in charge of a space, a civic space that they like to see as a civic space, but they are a private company looking after their own interests. So to do that, they've had to introduce these new community guidelines that are incredibly nudity averse, because somehow being naked for a lot of platforms equals being trafficked. Or anyway, even if it doesn't equal that, it's too much of a risk for them to have nudity on. So this is part of the paper that I've written. It's called the shadow ban cycle. So here I talk about how platforms are failing to tackle online harms. They're pushed to do something, both image-wise and also by governments and users. So they looked for something very visible, which is nudity, particularly after FOSTA-SESTA. They banned nudity, but still harmful and abusive, non-consensual online content keeps getting published, keeps remaining on platforms. And what happens here is that we are perpetrating a cycle where people who really need help and really need safety are not being looked after, and they're actually being deprived of a space where they're working or where they're simply existing and expressing themselves. So let's look at those guidelines in more detail. So if you look at Instagram, it says, always follow the law, respect everyone on Instagram, don't spam people or post nudity. And then it says it's not a place to support or praise terrorism, organized crime, or hate groups. And in the same sentence, in the same paragraph, it says it's also not a place to offer and sell sexual services. So sex work, which is a job, is in the same line as terrorism, organized crime, and hate groups. Balance, right? And then TikTok also say that they're mindful of content that may be offensive or culturally inappropriate in certain regions or may not be suitable for users of all ages. They design their algorithms with trust and safety in mind, and they tend to suspend or ban accounts that rack up or stack up multiple violations. I mean, this in theory makes sense, but you will see what happened to me in a second and you'll realize it doesn't. Also because sex and nudity and even sex work are not the same as terrorism, let me say. But the way these community guidelines are enforced is through automated governance. So through algorithmic enforcement, through algorithms, through machines that basically are not very good at doing nuance. So their result is very often either content removal or even account removal straight away. Which brings me to my own experiences. So you might be like, why is there an old lady in a picture, in this picture here? Why is there an old lady in a presentation about nudity? Well, that's my grandma, Nonna. She lives here. I saw her yesterday, actually. She's 93. She's very nice, bit whiny, but very pleasant to be around. And that was the first time that I saw her since the pandemic, because I didn't want to risk it. I didn't want to bring COVID to her house when the situation was so uncertain. So after a year and a half, I would say, of not seeing her, I post that picture on my Instagram, which I should say, as I said, it's very not safe for work, right? There's pictures of me twerking in a thong on my Instagram. That got my account deleted. So I post a picture with my grandma, pick up my phone, shortly after my account is gone. No email from Instagram, no notification from Instagram, no explanation about what I did wrong, just gone. And I obviously panicked because I worked through my Instagram, particularly when this happened. I still didn't have a postdoc, so I was an independent researcher, mainly making my money through selling online and offline pole dance classes. So losing my main community that I'd taken 12 years to build and losing my main source of income really was pretty damn depressing and worrying. I was lucky because I'm a researcher. I'm known to be researching on these topics. Instagram know my face because I talk to them. Still, despite that, I was deleted. But what I did then, I set some wheels in motion. So I emailed press, but Instagram press were out of the office because it was 7 p.m. on a weekday in London. I emailed my contacts at Meta Policy in San Francisco. They said that look into it. And I started furiously tweeting about it. By the way, if you ever get the platform, go whine about it on Twitter, because all the journalists are on Twitter, so if you get noticed, they might just help, which is what happened then. It was enough of a shitstorm for them to have to reverse it. So the day after I got my account back, I asked what had happened, and they told me it was a moderation error, and to this day, I don't have any clear explanation as to what happened. Someone who followed me, who worked inside Meta, told me it was a case of false positives, so it might have been just an algorithmic thing, but again, I don't know. And this is what's frustrating. If you don't have, in Italy we say saints in paradise, if you don't have friends in high places, your account is just going to stay gone. I'm currently playing intermediary between Meta and a few people who had their account deleted. They answer me when they want to answer me. Not all of these accounts have been recovered, and these people do not know why or what, happened. So it's a very frustrating system because the appeals also don't work. More on that in a sec. And this is another story. So this was an article that, again, got me my profile back. My TikTok has been deleted 4 times last year, or was deleted 4 times last year, 3 times in 1 week alone. Why? Again, pole dancing videos, but if you open up my account, you will see it's within community guidelines. You will see I wear skimpy bikinis, but I don't show nipples, I don't show nudity, and I'm not having sex on camera. So technically, that's within community guidelines. But still, what happened was I posted a video. I said that I was a pole dancer WAP, so with a PhD, doing a choreo to the obvious Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion song, because I just gotten my PhD, my doctor title, so I wanted to show it off naturally. And I wake up, and the morning after the video has gotten like 1 million views, which was very overwhelming, by the way, if you go from not having that many followers to having nearly 100,000 followers overnight. But the thing is, a lot of people really hated that video, so they thought it was inappropriate, particularly for a social network for children, which is not, but more on that later. And they went and posted a variety of negative comments, including rape threats, on my account. I kept reporting the rape threats. The rape threats were not deleted because they didn't go against community guidelines, apparently. But then I received a posting ban, so I couldn't post for a week, couldn't post brand partnerships, couldn't do my job as a content creator, and meaning that I could lose money out of it. And then my account was also gone. Luckily, this journalist, Chris Stoker-Walker, who's a brilliant freelance journalist that I really recommend you follow if you want to read about big tech, he took pity on me, and because he writes a lot about TikTok, he interviewed me for this piece and sent it off to TikTok and was like, guys, what's up? And my account was back. I thought that'd be the end of it, but then spring of 2021 came, and as I said, my account was deleted 3 times in a week, and it kept happening. I would post something, I would get deleted, I would appeal, I would get it back. And then at some point I was told I couldn't recover my account anymore, and again, I only got it back because Chris, this journalist, tweeted at the TikTok European CEO, and they got their act together and my account was back. Interestingly, I also emailed their creator support team, and they told me that as long as I posted implied nudity, my account would be flagged. Now, you can imply I'm naked underneath my clothes right now, but if we are running content moderation on implications, it becomes a very worrying scenario and territory. So my account hasn't been deleted since then, fingers crossed, but it has been heavily shadow banned. And again, every time I went through conventional appeals, things wouldn't work, or it would be very slow, to the point where I currently have a video under review, which has been removed on June the 24th. So just to give you an idea of scale, if you're a content creator working fast on a trend and something doesn't get re-uploaded for months, it's not very helpful, is it? So just to give you an idea of the issue of malicious flagging and of hate on TikTok, these screenshots, so the 2 ones at the top and the one at the bottom right, those are comments that I routinely receive on TikTok. They're about my morality or lack thereof. They're about how inappropriate my content is. But mass flagging is a bigger issue than a girl who wants to shake her ass on social media platforms and she can't do it. Actually, it's something that is used a lot against a variety of people. It's been used against sex workers. There was an incel facilitated purge of adult content creators in 2019 on Instagram, where an incel actually claimed responsibility and took ownership of that campaign and of removing a variety of people from the platform. And it's happened to people in war zones or reporting on war. A very famous TikTok influencer reporting from the Ukraine was mass reported by Russian trolls. So it's annoying in my case, and yes, of course, it might result in some financial damage, but these people are trying to report on war. So we are letting platforms and the most conservative people within the user base decide what stays up on platforms or not. Which brings me to the concept of automated powerlessness. This is a forthcoming paper, so it's not published yet, but I'm hoping it will be published this month. Basically, in this paper, I talk about how the powers that social media give to a group, and that's mainly platforms themselves, but also the most conservative users within their user base, outweigh the possibility that targeted users have to question or reverse decisions, or even to rehabilitate themselves. Currently, if you make a mistake on platforms that platforms judge to be too terrible, you are gone. You have no way to rehabilitate yourself, you're just gone. So an infrastructure and an internal process that allows deplatforming but no rehabilitation or no recovery, for me, is inadequate. It's not how a democratic society works. And it makes you feel powerless, which is why I talk about automated powerlessness. It's powerlessness caused by algorithms and by machines. And it's not equal. So, by the way, I've posted the picture on the left on my Instagram, and the reason why you see like little X's or little squares, in most images I've had to put them there because if I were to post those pictures, I would be deleted, but the people who originally posted those would not, and those people are celebrities. We all know and love Kim Kardashian for her nudes. We all love Cardi B because she's got her tits out all the time, but we can't do it. We average users can't work with our bodies, and it's even worse for sex workers because they make money off of their body, but their body is viewed as inherently dangerous by platforms, which is something that I address in a paper with Susanna Passonen called Sex in the Shadows of Celebrity. And if you look at the pictures in the middle in particular, those are pictures from the movie Hustlers, where Jennifer Lopez and Cardi B play strippers. Now, Cardi was a stripper herself, so I'm going to cut her some slack. But while actual strippers and pole dancers were being deplatformed by Instagram, the movie Hustlers was being sold to us through ads throughout the whole of Instagram and Facebook with pictures in the same aesthetic, if not more naked. So there's a clear discrepancy here between what an average user can post and what a celebrity can post, which has been proven by the X-Check investigation by the Wall Street Journal, where essentially Meta gives a blank check to celebrities who want to post controversial content because it brings hits or whatever, popularity to the platform. And then in the bottom left corner, you can see a picture of Playboy, where again, I had to put those little X's because if I posted it, I'd be deplatformed. You can't report Playboy for nudity. There's no, not that I want to report Playboy for nudity, but I've noticed that if you do want to go and report them for nudity, you can't, while if I were to post that same picture, the option is there for me. So clearly, some people are given a more lenient treatment than others. Which brings me to my current project at the CDC. So I'm looking into malicious flagging or mass reporting, which is what happened to me, and it's what happens to a variety of users. So as you probably know, flagging is a way for users to report content to social media platforms. It allows them to express their concerns about platform governance, but the issue is that even such an important thing like flagging is already misused within a very opaque and unfair social media governance system. And it can become a very effective and crippling online abuse technique, to the point where the bodies of a trans couple on Instagram received 3 reports, according to the oversight board, and were deplatformed as a result. So we're essentially saying, you know, you can find 3 people that the platform doesn't like. Sorry, we can find 3 people that don't like you, and then they get them to report you, and then you're gone. That could be enough if your content is controversial enough for moderators or for the platform. Let me just check how I'm doing for time. Please stop me, I do have a tendency to talk too much. But yeah, so basically what I'm doing to infer platforms' flagging approach and flagging mechanism is to go backwards. So I'm trying to use users' experience to figure out how it is that they do it, what it is that triggers certain mechanisms, and what it is that can be done about it to improve them. So I've done a qualitative survey amongst about 125 users, and I've also done interviews that I'm about to wrap up. So what I'm asking people is essentially to tell me whether they've been deplatformed and received negative comments at the same time. Because a lot of these people that post really horrible comments on your profile are then likely to report you. So As I said, these were the inclusion criteria. Why? Based on my personal experience and based on the experiences of people that have had deplatforming and flagging happen to them. And these are some of my preliminary findings. Essentially, yes, flagging is an online abuse technique. It's being incredibly misused, so much that some researchers are calling it user-generated warfare. People know that platforms tend to deplatform people that they don't like, particularly sex workers. So they are using this against them. And then when people are deplatformed, their experiences is that they can't speak to an actual human to verify what's going on. Someone told me, I don't think I ever spoke to a human ever. They were just trying to find somebody to explain, somebody to tell them what they did wrong. They couldn't. Malicious flagging becomes a way of community policing, so it basically hands the reins of platform governance to the most conservative users. This results in lost money and opportunities for people, saying that it's destroyed their income, their connections, their opportunities, and their relationships. Some people claim to have lost money in the thousands because of losing their account and because of malicious flagging. It also has a chilling effect on art and on content creation, so much that an artist told me it does put your creative process into question because you begin to consider alternatives to making your art so that it stays up, so that you don't get deplatformed. And then it discriminates against people. Some people feel ashamed of being who they are, and they feel like what they are is disgusting because of the treatment that they've received from platforms. It essentially replicates offline shame in a space that was initially so good for discovery, particularly discovery of new sexual practices, body positivity, acceptance of different communities. Now that's going. Platforms are becoming incredibly sanitized. It's like platforms are afraid of bodies to make money. To make money for them is more important than to foster community. To make money for them is more important than making people feel welcome and feel safe. Because if you lose your source of income, if you lose your money, if you lose your community, if you lose your source of education and expression, it doesn't mean that you're safe. So the way platforms govern their spaces essentially replicates the worst of I should write words that I can pronounce. Retributive models of governance. Essentially, they overlook the needs of offenders and they don't try to rehabilitate them. And even worse, they treat all offenders equally. So if you've posted a tit, you're the same as someone who's posted a beheading, essentially. According to community guidelines, by the way, because terrorism is in the same line as sex work. So in a way, you're being ostracized from a public space in a measure, in a move that is not too dissimilar from banishment from medieval cities. It is a pretty medieval way to govern spaces. So just to wrap up, the way platforms' affordances or lacking affordances, so the functionalities that they provide affect users is that they do not have access to specific information about deletions. Their profiles are disabled without warning, so they have no way to kind of monitor what's happening. Weaponized flagging is a thing, so it's used as a form of online abuse. Nudity is viewed as inherently risky after fosta sesta. So people are viewed to be having sex by default, even if they just happen to be naked without having sex, which is very non-consensual. And platforms rely on very puritanical and old-fashioned, non-inclusive depictions of bodies, so much that their community guidelines have been found by media reports to be based off of Victoria's Secret advertising, or to be trying to legislate what mode of breast cupping or grabbing is okay. So for Meta, if you cup your breasts, you're fine, but if you grab, if you're squeezing a bit too hard, then that's bad, that's sexual, that needs to be removed, which is quite grotesque. So in a way, we need to ask, safety for whom? Who do you want to be safe on your platforms? If you really want everybody to be safe, you need to be more transparent about your decisions. You need personalized notifications. You need to invest in teams to actually speak to creators who make their money through your platforms. And you need to recognize that flagging is a form of online abuse as well. So they need to stop assuming that sexual activity is synonymous with nudity. They need to realize that bodies are a form of expression, And they need to rethink their positionality in content moderation. They need to think, wait, I'm judging this as inappropriate. I'm judging this as sexual, but is it? Or why am I judging it like that? Which prejudice am I implementing in this question, in this decision? So essentially, platforms need a systemic overhaul, which I'm aware is not going to happen just because somebody who posts a lot of nudity is demanding it. But I think the way platforms moderate nudity really tells a lot about freedom of expression or lack thereof on their apps, and how dangerous it is for situations like, you know, impending conflicts, or like the war in Ukraine, or gray areas like war reporting. So I think, because of my experience, but also because of what I've seen through my research, they really do need to do better. So, as I said, appeals are often too slow. Marginalized creators rely on Instagram to work, and then when they click appeal, they are sent the wrong link, they hear no answer, their ID upload doesn't work. It's even worse for trans creators who are asked their dead name, and then they're told you're not the same person when they're uploading a document. The oversight board, which is Meta's tribunal, is very good, but at the same time, they don't really have an account recovery system. It's just about content. And people interpret the flagging function as a way to say, I don't like this content, and not as a way of saying this content is dangerous and it needs to be off the platform. So I think platforms really need to learn how to mitigate this and to curate their feeds better to prevent this from happening. So this is pretty much it. If you have further questions, there's the ngl.link /blogger on poll, or you could raise your hand. If you want to find me afterwards, I'm at Blogger on Poll everywhere while I'm still there, and my email is also there. So thank you so much for having me and for letting me go on. And my voice is still there. Yay!
You did it great, actually.
Oh, thank
your
you.
voice was perfect.
Oh.
Does this work? No?
Oh.
Does this work? Okay.
If you want, I can stand if that doesn't
Well,
work.
maybe we can use this also for questions in the room, no? Well, okay, well, first of all, thank you so much, and your voice was perfect, and actually, your talk was really inspiring, intriguing, and very entertaining as well. So it's really a great way to kickstart our lecture series. And yeah, I just want to make a short comment, because you mentioned war zones and war reporting, and I actually experienced firsthand this issue of content moderation when I was doing my ethnography in Syria back in 2011 during the outbreak of the Arab Spring. Well, my Syrian friends started to upload stuff from, like, basically the documentation of human rights violation during the protests, and all of a sudden they saw these videos literally disappearing from Facebook and YouTube. And at the time, we started writing about the issue, and the response was, you know, but this is an exception, this is a war zone, this is a crisis zone. And we kept shouting and saying, no, no, this is going to happen to us, to everyone, because these platforms have an ambiguous nature, which is that they like to advertise themselves as public spaces, public spheres, but they are not, in fact. So they have their own regulations. And so I'm glad, I'm not glad that the topic has gone out from the ghetto of, you know, Middle Eastern media studies and now back to the mainstream. So, but I'm glad that people are talking about this, because it's really something, as you wrote on the slide, no one can feel safe in such an environment where everything can be taken away from us without even giving explanation, as it happened to you and your nonna. So thank you for raising the issue in such an inspiring and rich way. And I think it's better to give the floor to the students. I'm sure. I mean, the talk was so inspiring. I don't know, you want to check the...
Thank you. I'm checking the thing,
yeah.
And I've seen some questions, but I just wanted to answer to your comment. I feel like marginalized communities or even marginalized topics are the Cassandras of big tech. We're always like announcing, guys, this is going to happen, and everybody is like, no, you're fine, it's all good. And now since Trump got deplatformed, everybody is going on about content moderation, and I'm like, too late, guys. Like, it's been happening for ages. You just didn't care about it. So, I mean, it's up to you. If anybody has a question to ask IRL, I'm happy to start with you. Otherwise, if you need warming up, you don't need warming up. Okay, you go.
Yeah, first of all, was a really good speech and I enjoyed it like all the time. But
Thank you.
how can we fight this policy? I mean, how can there's any chance to change this media's policy in order to make it easy for these content creators?
That is an excellent question, and I'm very glad that we started with the $1 million question today, because I think these are the important questions to ask. And you know what? I feel like there are two avenues here. One avenue is if we all collectively stop using these platforms, and then they're going to be hit in their bottom line, and then they're going to be like, oh, we really need to improve this. I don't think it's going to happen if we use that avenue of stopping to use the platform. Like, I've seen so many protests that are like, Instagram blackout, I'm not going to use the platform today. And I'm like, you do you, boo, but they're still going to be there. Like, Kim Kardashian is still going to post. You know, people are still going to go on the platform and, like, you know, perv on somebody's story. Like, if it's not Instagram, it's going to be TikTok. And if it's not going to be TikTok, it's going to be the next platform. So I think governments have washed their hands out of platforms and how they're run for too long, which is why and how we got to this place. It's interesting because governments used to panic about other media technology, like they used to panic about radio, they used to panic about television. There was a lot of antitrust legislation. There was a lot of, even control within mainstream media to make sure that it was fair. And it feels like with platforms have not been considered real life by governments for too long, and now governments and their laws as a result are very out of step with the speed of technological change. So there are some really good efforts towards improving content moderation in the DSA, so the Digital Services Act in Europe, where platforms would be forced to tell people what is happening to their data and why they're being deplatformed and give more information. The DSA has also made a commitment to look after marginalized communities, although they haven't exactly explained how. So I think the future is in a combo of good government legislation, so not like Fosta Sesta, because Fosta Sesta is, a terrible piece of legislation and a really harmful piece of legislation. So good government legislation, but also platforms need to invest in content moderation, and they need to invest in community-focused content moderation. So while there are issues with platforms like Reddit, for instance, having subreddits moderated by people that are part of that community can help in having at least subcultural or culturally relevant content stay up. While at the moment you get a moderator from some country that doesn't know about your story and your life, far removed from your culture and your experience, moderating your content in 20 seconds. So the problem is legal, so Fosta Sesta and bad legislation pushing platforms to do the wrong thing. The problem is financial, with platforms not wanting to spend money on specific things but spend money on others. And the problem is a work problem as well, because the current moderation infrastructure is bad for labor rights, for the labor rights of creators, and for the labor rights of moderators who are paid no money in third world countries and who are made to watch beheadings over and over and are not encouraged to improve their work because they're working by the moderation. So I think both. That was a very long-winded answer, I'm sorry. So better government legislation that's going to force platforms to do better. But also I think we need a labor rights movement that brings all creators together, because something that makes me really sad is when I see people say, art is not porn, we shouldn't be deleted or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, art is not porn, but art can be pornographic. And on top of that, if you just fight for your little corner, nobody is going to win because it's only your category, while it's a problem that affects all of us. Like Donatella just said, it affects people in Syria, it affects people in Ukraine, it affects people in war zones, and it affects content creators. So I think it's a bit of a class action kind of thing. I get very political about it, but thank you for your question.
I just want to add something on this class action, because you made a great point about that, and I do think that we should actually rethink the whole thing in that direction, in the class action. And recently, I don't know if you have read about this, but this is a very interesting case, because for the first time, a Kenyan worker, a content moderator who was working in a, it was like, they outsource, like big companies in Silicon Valley or even TikTok, the Chinese company, they do outsource content moderation to third world countries or non-Western countries. Most of them are based in the Philippines or other places where the level of English is good. So the story, which is published now by the Time magazine, so it's a big story, is I don't remember the name of the guy, but it's a recent one, who brought to court for the first time, so a Kenyan worker, content moderator, brought to court Facebook, or Meta, as it is called now, because his argument is that he has been exploited, and also not only financially speaking, but also because he was made to watch movies, not movies, clips that affect the psyche without having any infrastructural support from the company, and this is a huge thing. And I do believe that, and there are now lots of cases around the world, like the issue of content moderation in terms of labor, exploited labor has been now, it's definitely more visible than, I remember in 2018 there was this documentary which probably Professor Migal is showing in class, called, it's from 2018, The Cleaners. And the title also, cleaning the web from the trash, the beheadings, but also, nudity. This is a task that is outsourced to people who are coming from the global south mostly. So it's important that these cases are now becoming visible, and also by becoming visible, they have also the courage to bring people like Zuckerberg and the likes to court, because otherwise this would be, if you watch the documentary in 2018, all the faces are pixelated because they didn't want to come out with their own face because they were threatened, of course. They were at risk of losing their job. And now the situation is slightly different. So I do think this is the right direction, to unite, because also there are so many micro tasks on the internet, and everything is so fragmented. But as you mentioned, the struggle should be a global struggle, a common struggle, not just a struggle of people working in the art or people working in another, section.
And it's so interesting that, I'm appalled that I haven't mentioned him yet, but Dalton Gillespie, an amazing academic, always gets a mention in these talks because he wrote a variety of research papers and books about the politics of platforms. And he mentions how platform is such a useful word for companies because it means a platform for you, the user, to express yourself. But it's an advertising platform for advertisers. But also legally, it's so convenient for platforms because it means that they are just creating a space. They're not condoning those words. So they can wash their hands out of anything that happens in there. So that way, platforms have basically managed to just reject any duty of care that they might have with their users. And in the UK, we've just had a really, really horrible case where a teenager took her own life after content that she consumed and saw on social media about suicide. And there was a really stark contrast between her father going to court to testify and talking about the horrible things that he found out that his daughter had seen, and the people from Facebook showing up in suits, coming out of like a big car and kind of not showing that much emotion. And I appreciate that nobody wants to be in that space. But I think the lack of care is quite striking. And I don't think these people sit at a table to say, how do we make our users' life horrible today? Because when I speak to them, they are actually they are horrified by the experiences I talk about and by the experiences of users that I share with them. But they are so far removed from them that they don't see themselves as having to deal with it, or they don't take them into account when they're making their rules or making their decisions. Shall I? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
No, go
No, I
ahead.
just wanted to say that it's also incredible that, we consider the internet to be like a universal global space, but in fact, FOSTA says, so a law that is passed by a government, the US government, affects everyone, affects Bangladesh as much as it affects China, affects Egypt, Italy, everyone, so that's also a paradox in a way.
It is a paradox, and the concept of risk that they're talking about, financial risk, is also a very American concept of the American financial industry. So even legislations and countries that might be more lenient, for instance, towards sex work, still have to abide by that notion of risk because it's American and because that's where the finance markets and social media are. I'm just going to look at the questions there. Really good one. Okay. What is your position on Instagram recently banning Pornhub's account, taking into consideration that Pornhub facilitates online abuse and trafficking, but also provides work for many women? So a really great question and a nuanced one, so thank you so much for asking. I think it's a difficult one. Let's start with the fact that actually research has found that the most non-consensual videos, the most image-based sexual abuse, the most trafficking videos, and even the most child abuse material is actually hosted on Facebook, not on Pornhub. So it's quite which makes me think is Meta gonna moderate itself? Is Meta gonna delete its own account then? I feel like the Pornhub Instagram account itself is a brand account. So I feel what Meta was doing was more like taking a PR stand than actually taking a safety stand. Because if they were actually talking about safety, there were so many other measures that they could take. They could remove the actual videos on their platforms, while the Pornhub account is actually quite tame, considering a lot that's happening. I think you can draw a line. You can say, look, this is what our policies allow, but it's quite interesting that they've gone for that account. And let's remember that FOSTA SESTA itself, but also a lot of the decisions related to the banning of porn and of nudity are pushed by a lobby of far-right evangelical Christians in the US. I'm not making this up, there's a variety of media reports about it. It's a group called Exodus Cry that have rebranded as an anti-trafficking organization. They pushed for FOSTA SESTA to happen, and then they pushed MasterCard to remove support from Pornhub, and then they kind of became more visible when OnlyFans started banning adult content and then had to make a U-turn. And I think while I appreciate that there's a lot of harmful content on Pornhub, and I might not love Pornhub as a company, at the same time, the fact that there are so many videos on Meta itself and on Facebook itself makes me think, well, this is more of an image kind of thing than a safety kind of thing. And I think also the lobbies behind the banning of particular accounts like Pornhub, or not even that particular account, but behind specific decisions, make me think that it's not a genuine thing done out of, promoting safety, if that makes sense. I hope that answers your question. I'm going to look into another question. Do you think the DSA will change content moderation practices? So, I don't know if it will change content moderation practices. What I do hope it will change is that it will spook platforms into doing better. And I think at the moment, I actually wouldn't want to be platform companies because they're being hit from all sorts of directions with legislation from all over the place. So they're going to have to comply with the car crash UK online safety bill if it ever gets approved. They're going to have to comply with the Canadian bill. They're going to have to comply with the DSA and so on and so forth. And I think they might just have to overhaul what they're doing. And I think the DSA might give them a little bit of due process, which is what they currently don't have. So I hope, even if it doesn't change content moderation itself, I hope what it does change is the process of appeals, which it sounds like it could. I think that could be really beneficial for users in particular, at least to know what the hell's happening to your data. Like, it's mind-boggling to me that you could spend years building a platform and your pictures could be gone, your memories could be gone. Like, there's people in my study saying, I had pictures with my children when they were little that I've now lost. I had pictures with family that are now dead that I've now lost. I've lost my support networks. There's no way to recover it. And in the UK, the online safety bill, which is, again, a car crash of a bill, I hope it doesn't get approved and it gets revised. It is asking platforms to allow users to better download their data once their account is deleted. So I hope something else like that will happen as well. But it's a mishmash of legislation that is happening worldwide. So we're definitely in for interesting times, I would say. These, I think, were actually all the questions so far. Do we have any other questions in the room? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So thank you so much for your nuanced account, and particularly for highlighting the gender dimension and the labor dimension. I was struck by your use of the term rehabilitation, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, and particularly if you could say more about whether this is a term used by the platforms themselves, whether this is a term that you have been using. I couldn't quite get that, so thank you.
Thank you for asking me to elaborate on that. It's a concept I really care about, but I didn't want to speak for ages, so I just rushed through it. Actually, it's a term that I mainly got inspired by a paper by Schoenbeck and Blackwell, so two amazing researchers based in the US. And in their paper, they talk about platform-enabled harms and platform-perpetrated harms. So the harms that platforms facilitate and the harms that platforms make themselves. And then they talk about how actually, if you compare this to offline legal scenarios, you are an offender, right, when you're violating community guidelines. But if you are an offender offline, you pay a fine, you go to jail, like, unless you've done something really horrible and then you know, either there's the death penalty or you're in jail for your whole life. There is a form of rehabilitation, but there's nothing like that on platforms. Like, technically, you could post one thing that is bad and then be removed forever. There is no, like, there is no space for you to say, well, actually, you know, I've been banned for this long. Can I have my account back now? Like, there are bits of softer, let's say, justice. So, for instance, posting bans that are not account bans, there's shadow banning. But because users are so poorly notified of it, and because, again, there's no way to appeal them correctly, it's just not a very useful process. And the fact that, again, all violators are treated equally. Someone who may have posted a beheading with someone who's posted a tit. It's a bit of a difficult legal scenario. They don't have any legal legs to stand on at the moment, which is why it's interesting that Meta has its own oversight board deciding over cases, because I think it makes a step towards saying, actually, this is a legal thing. Like, you're depriving me of my right to work and of my right to freedom of expression. You need to have a good reason for it. And I feel like not many users know enough about it, because I feel like Meta publicize it. I feel they publicize it more with, like, the higher-ups of society, like saying, oh, look, we did a good thing. But I think users, when they are deplatformed, they feel extremely lost, and there's no step that they can follow, no step-by-step guide that they can follow to kind of rehabilitate themselves. Like, they have no probation officer, they have no summons, they have nothing, you know? So that's where the whole thing comes from, I guess. I hope it answers your question. Any other questions? Gonna check the app meanwhile. Nope. I think everybody is probably hungry at this stage.
Okay, thank you very much, Karina, for your talk. So I was wondering on the, I have a kind of question or comment on the flagging, so your current research, because you were pointing towards this mechanism of flagging. So since I know that you also have profiles on non-commercial platforms, and mostly there the moderation is done by the people themselves. So you were also pointing in your the first answer into the first question to the kind of community-based moderation. So I was wondering if you, first of all, if you also get a way to include the non-commercial, content moderation within the research you are undertaking at the moment, but also if you have also any experience on that, if you've been noticing this kind of the difference that exists, because to me it really looks that non-commercial platforms have let's say a better capacity to the possibility of content moderation works really again in a different way. People are more capable of managing the content, and also the flagging again maybe does not become really this kind of the kind of banning mechanism you were mentioning. So if you have any kind of comment on that, and also if that's part of the research you're undertaking.
That's a really excellent question. Thank you so much for asking it. So at the moment, I'm largely focusing on Instagram and on TikTok, mainly because that's where my experience lies, and that's where I feel I can contribute the most. But that being said, a lot of people are telling me of cross-platform abuse that comes off Instagram and TikTok and arrives to non-commercial platforms as well. So I would say they're probably more effective in not moderating, but I know a lot of people who have been deplatformed from mainstream social media platforms for Telegram mass reporting campaigns, for instance. So I know of like Italian, actually, transgender activists that ended up in a fascist Telegram group that then essentially just egged each other on for them to be deplatformed. So while I think there's something good about non-commercial platforms in the sense that they're better at encryption, they're better at privacy, and obviously their content remains within that group, so it doesn't reach as many people for the platform to worry too much about doing harm. I think in a world where fosta sesta exists, we just need to be careful in general, because at the end of the day, non-commercial platforms are platforms. They may not be Instagram and TikTok, they may not have that viewership or that user base, but if they are seen to be facilitating certain things, they are technically in violation of fosta sesta. So I don't know how they're negotiating that within themselves. I don't know how they're getting away with it. I'd be really interested actually to interview them to figure out their experiences as opposed to the policy people at bigger platforms. But what I'm noticing with a lot of these apps that are meant to like foster freedom of expression and foster smaller communities is that a lot of these platforms fold, and they fold because they can't moderate at scale. So I wonder where the tipping point is, and I wonder how long they're gonna last. Because like just this week, there were news about Telegram being hacked or something. So I don't know again where that will take us. But you've raised a really interesting point that maybe I'll explore further in my research. It doesn't really answer your question, but you've inspired me. So thank you. Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I'm going to word this correctly or everything, but when you were talking about your automated powerlessness, it had me thinking about trends and virality and kind of how that works. Do you think in this sense that when we're, as users, like let's say I'm advocating through Instagram body positivity, for example, and this is a trend right now, lots of people are talking about it, do you think that that's the best time to post something or the worst time to post something because of the regulations and the shadow banning that has been put into place?
That is a really good question that I'm gonna answer with my content creator hat on and then with my researcher hat on. So from a content creation perspective, you obviously want to post when something is hot. Like you just want to follow the trend. From a regulation perspective and from an academic perspective, that might mean that you may be targeted with more abuse, that you may be deplatformed more if you go viral, particularly if something you do is slightly controversial. And when I say controversial, I don't mean controversial for a normal person, I mean controversial for a troll. So I've seen transgender activists go viral and be deplatformed. TikTok has a really bad record with people of color, so they were shadow banning and deplatforming Black Lives Matter content. So and I think this is the dilemma that we face as creators, right? So this is why it's such a good question, because you chase virality, you chase fame, you chase views, you just want an audience. This is why we use these platforms. And the same mechanisms that would help us do really well are also the same mechanisms that are gonna get us deplatformed and harassed. So one of my followers, when I was talking about my TikTok stuff and how often they were deplatforming, he was like, it's like you're in an abusive relationship with TikTok. And as a survivor of that type of relationship, it's not lost on me that it's actually like that, because they say, we want you here, but we want you here only if you look a certain way and if you do a certain thing, and if you act within these parameters, and if you don't, then you're gone, and you're gone forever. It's like an emotional roller coaster. And people in my study have reported a really crippling kind of emotional fallout from this. So what you raised is essentially the dilemma of any content creator that is very difficult to solve, and I think people navigate on a day-by-day basis. So thank you for asking that.
Thank you.
I'm going to check the questions in case there's any more. Mm-hmm. No, we're good, I think, here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is a great talk. You talked about labor rights movement. Like, so how would that, what does that look like, right? Because usually when you think of, labor movements, like in the United States, I'm from the United States, it's a labor movement with, they pull everybody from all the states together. We're talking about the world, right? So have you envisioned what that would look like to create something like that?
Excellent question. I love this. We're unionizing already. So actually, an influencer union has opened in a variety of places. So I think in Italy was the latest country to do that. And obviously, there's a lot of silly articles being like, influencers are unionizing. But it's so important. Like I think already unionizing within different sets of platform work is so important, like having content moderator unions, influencer and creator unions, even like tech worker union, like, Amazon workers in the US recently unionized, Uber drivers unionized. In the UK, Uber drivers got worker status, which means that they have more right than they would if they still be a gig economy worker. So I think there needs to be a wider gig economy movement that strings all people together. Obviously, because of jurisdiction, it's very difficult to make it a global thing. But even if it's a regional thing or, a nationwide thing, platforms, I think, will be forced to do something about it. And I think it's particularly important for creators because the creator economy is so fickle. So I get paid for creating content, not all the time. I don't always do it. I only do it with content that I care about. But I make my price. And someone from the LSE, Zoe Glatt, she's an amazing early career researcher herself. She's written about the creator economy and how different creators are paid in different ways. So for instance, creators of color are paid less than their white counterparts for the same campaign at the, equal following stuff. So I think unionizing and coming together and sharing these experiences is incredibly important, because if we don't, then we don't know what someone else in our situation is facing. And I think what's very convenient for platforms is this climate of hush-hush, like people not raising problems. And I think the more people start talking about it and the more unions form, I think that's a good way to start. I think with unions, definitely. And unions are a big thing in Italy, which is probably why I'm very much about like protesting. But some of my biggest inspiration are strippers, and strippers in the UK have unionized and have done amazing work to force club owners to treat them better. And similarly, I think in New York, strippers have unionized as well. And strippers are very similar to gig workers in a way. And in a way, they have it even worse because they have to pay house fees and all of that stuff just to work. So I think if you get different sets of workers coming together and saying, we've had enough of this, here are our rights, you've got to listen, I think a movement in one country is going to bleed onto another country, and then slowly we're going to take over the world. I think that's it. I think we're done with onlines as well. So.
Okay, so you want to say something about pole dancing?
Yeah. Come to the dark side. It's fun. Whether no matter the gender, no matter the age, if you start pole dancing, the whole world is going to open up to you. It's really fun, and chances are you can even write about it in your research. So really recommend. But no, thank you for listening. I was really inspired by all of your questions. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of you tomorrow, maybe in class. And yeah, if there's anything, you can always find me online up until they delete my ass again. So make it count while it's there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Carolina. Yes, it's odd, I know. And I want to thank Professor Migali also and his students for being here, and the Com department and the Media Lab for making the live streaming possible. And see you on November 10th, which is the next talk for Digital Delights and Disturbances. We are featuring something completely different, although there are lots of links to the discussion we had today. It's Professor Nick Coldry from LSE talking about data colonialism. So stay tuned, and thank you for being here, and have a good evening.
Thank you so much, and thank you again for having me. Thank you. Oh, my voice.